If you've experienced any traumatic event in your life and you continue to struggle with intrusive reactions like explosive anger, panic, overwhelming sadness, confusion, numbness, and you're not sure why, and you've been frustrated with yourself, embarrassed, feel like I'm losing my mind, like I'm crazy, something's wrong with me. Today's video, I'm gonna tell you the #1 reason why trauma makes you feel crazy. Hi, I'm John Hawkins Jr. I'm a licensed psychotherapist, certified trauma specialist, and co-founder of Hawkins Counseling Center. In this video, I'm going to explain to you why these things happen, why they continue to happen, and most importantly, how you can stop them from happening and heal from what you've been through. And that is the issue of implicit memories. All my clients, if they're watching this video, are probably laughing right now because they know I talk about that 5 to 10 times a session, whether someone sees me for 5 weeks or 5 years. It is the key to everything, or I refer to it as the whole ball of wax. Even if it's not like a major trauma, it's still these implicit memories that are causing all the issues. And what's most challenging is they're not in our conscious awareness. So I'm going to explain to you, beginning right now, about implicit memories, the positive elements of them, and then we're going to get into how they form in trauma and they really start hijacking your life. And they are the key to healing from trauma as well. So implicit is, like it refers to, it's not conscious. Like explicit is something that's directly stated. So let's say I'm growing up in a home and nobody says explicitly, we don't talk during dinner because dad gets angry and reacts, but we just know that's a rule. I saw him snap at my brother one time and I said, I don't want to do that. So there's been an implicit message that says, don't talk during dinner. So it's not explicitly stated. In terms of memory, conscious awareness is stored in one part of our brain called the hippocampus. And so that's images, facts, data, words. You're aware that you're retrieving it, you share it with other people, it's out in the open. Implicit is just a felt sense in the body of sensory information and emotions. It has no imagery, no conscious thought, no sense of linear time. And I always say no capacity whatsoever to differentiate people, place, and setting. In a positive sense, this is how we learn activities, how we form habits, behaviors that we want. So what happens, it's through a process called priming. So we are exposed to a stimulus and then we respond in a certain way or have a certain emotional reaction to that stimulus. And with repetition, we start to form neural pathways in the brain through a process called neuroplasticity that starts to automate this thing and make it more efficient, more effective, more reflexive. So if you think of like probably the classic example goes back to early psychology where they had a dog and they would show a steak to the dog's mouth would salivate, and then they started to pair that. They would ring a bell, then show the steak. After a few repetitions, the dog would make the association, develop a neural pathway, and then he would predict that if I see the bell, the steak is coming, so the bell would cause salivation. So this is how an implicit memory is formed through priming. So think of other things as well. Like I'm a musician and I play guitar. So whether you're learning how to play guitar, drive a car, type, different things like this, we have to consciously learn first. So we're thinking about it, we're practicing it, we're engaging in repetitive experience with these behaviors. So after a while, it starts to transfer to other parts of the brain so it can get automated. Because the brain wants to automate everything it can because it conserves energy, which increases our chances for survival. So when we were prehistoric humans, we weren't guaranteed a meal that day. There was no restaurants, no Starbucks. We had to go out and find food on a daily basis. So we had limited amounts of energy and we had no guarantee food was coming back. So the brain developed this priority of taking things and automating them. When that starts to happen, there's 2 brain regions that are involved, and don't worry about these names. But one is the basal ganglia, the other is the cerebellum, which means little brain because it looks like a little version of the big brain. So the basal ganglia is really responsible and involved in forming habits, reflexive behaviors, repetitive behaviors. And then the cerebellum kind of fine-tunes some of our motor movements. And like when I was learning how to play guitar, there were certain really intricate like chord formations or scales. It took me a long time to learn how to play. So my conscious mind is learning them, then they're getting transferred to the basal ganglia, and then they're getting tweaked by the cerebellum. So in terms of habit formation, right? So in that case, where I was learning how to type or play guitar or drive, those kind of things. These are good, habit formations, good repetitive behaviors. But there's also ones that aren't as functional. Maybe we have in our history a way we adapted to a certain situation where we learned maybe how to interact with dad or mom or peers to avoid shame or criticism or punishment. Let's say if it wasn't safe to feel anger, I kept my head down, stayed quiet, stayed under the radar. So that was a very adaptive strategy. So I formed this pattern of behavior, a neural network. And then now maybe as a 40-year-old man at work or in my relationship, it's not so adaptive to, be passive, avoidant, avoid conflict, not stick up for myself. But this got mapped in so repetitively for so many years. Now it's this automated response that goes faster than my conscious brain. So a lot of these implicit memories can be, influencing our emotions, our repetitive ways of thinking, our behaviors, and we're not even aware of it. Are the decisions we make, how we prioritize things. And this is where it starts to become a problem. Even outside of, trauma and post-traumatic stress, these things are on a daily basis often are running our lives and we're not even aware of it. I laugh sometimes at, for years I remember growing up and hearing these things when my dad was in martial arts or in psychology or other things where you only use 5% of your brain. And a lot of times these things get handed down and nobody questions them. But once you understand how the brain works, it's actually ridiculous, that statement. We're using pretty much all of our brain all the time unless there's a traumatic brain injury or impairment. I think what people were trying to convey was we're probably only consciously aware of 5% or less of what is actually happening to us. So that's a big part of my work in therapy is we want to take some of these implicit patterns and memories and networks and bring them out into conscious awareness. So nowhere does that show up more than in post-traumatic stress, where these things get very influential, very intrusive. There's another video I've done on post-traumatic stress called 4 Signs You Might Have Post-Traumatic Stress or PTSD. And I encourage you to watch that video if you want a more extensive understanding of what it actually is. But there's 4 main, characteristics of post-traumatic stress. So the first would be intrusions. So thoughts, memories, emotions, nightmares, things like that come intrusively against my will. Then there's avoidance. So there's, maybe I don't talk about what happened. I don't want to think about it, go to that area where it happened. Or I might avoid through compulsive behaviors like drugs and alcohol, food, sex, spending, where I just keep blocking any awareness or emotions that I don't want to feel through those behaviors. The third area would be alterations or changes in mood or cognition. So maybe I have a very negative view of the world now after the traumatic event. My thinking is very distorted. Maybe I'm very detached, numb. I can't feel positive emotions, and I wasn't like this before the trauma. So now it's created a real shift in the way I think and the way I feel. The fourth area is hyperarousal. So then, you hear things about startle response and post-traumatic stress, insomnia, chronic anxiety, all these type of things. So those are kind of like 4 main areas of post-traumatic stress. And then I'm gonna explain how implicit memory really contributes to all those things. So implicit memory is so associated with the formation and development of post-traumatic stress. So what happens is when we have that overwhelming energetic experience, from what's going on out here, and our brain is going to get negatively affected or even cause cellular death of the upper brain if all that energy comes through my system. So neurologically in the brainstem and the thalamus, which is like a relay switch for your 5 senses, it floods with natural opiates, blocks that energy from getting to the upper brain to protect it. And now all that energy gets stored and encoded in emotional memories, sensory memories in my body on a cellular level. So things like sensation, sound, hearing, taste, different things can get imprinted in implicit memory. So then they come intrusively when they get triggered by any association. And they typically don't come with the images of the event, although they can, at times, but it's more these sensations, emotions, this embodied memory, maybe the panic I felt at the time, or just overwhelming sadness, fear, these stress responses and the chemicals associated with them got frozen in my system and imprinted. And then they cause, like I was saying, when I talked about those characteristics of PTSD, so I might be, more positively thinking, but my trauma gets triggered and then I have this very negative view, or I'm very down, or I wake up today and I'm just tremendously sad and in despair, but I don't know why. Or, I have an interaction with somebody, part of me perceives it as a slight, and I flip out on them and have a rage episode. And on a scale of 1 to 10, maybe the average person would have felt a 3, I felt a 9 or 10. So that other 6 or 7 is coming from the implicit memories that are getting activated in my body. But again, you typically don't see anything, so I just feel like it's all that person. And if you are a person who strives to be caring, compassionate, you come out of that state, now you feel tremendous guilt and shame about how you reacted. Or you could be in another circumstance where everybody's doing this thing together as a group, but something about that triggers a huge fear response for me, and then I don't want to do it, or I want to avoid, or I just want to leave. And again, oftentimes I feel embarrassed or inadequate, or something's wrong with me, or I just can't get out of this depressive state. I'm just really shut down, and that was out of character for me before these traumatic events. So this is some of the ways that these implicit memories will keep showing up, and it's the primary cause to what I was saying early in the video. Like, this is what makes you feel crazy, because you're looking around, and let's say I could have a massive fear response, and I'm looking around the environment, and I'm like, rationally, I know there's nothing threatening here, but my body is feeling terrified. So there's this real disconnect between my conscious mind and what my body is experiencing that makes you feel crazy, or what's wrong with me, or do I need to go to a hospital, or I just need to get away from everyone before I infect them with my trauma, or whatever it may be. And it's been years you've been dealing with this stuff. So this is why you're having these reactions. It's purely contributed to by these implicit memories. The next thing I want to talk about is the connection, and this is key, between the amygdala and implicit memories. So the amygdala, which just means almond in Latin, because the part of the brain is shaped like a little almond, and it is our brain's threat detector for the environment. So it's scanning, tracking for any perceived social threat, physical threat, emotional threat, and then it triggers a response. And it is hugely involved in the formation of emotional memories, both pleasurable and painful, and including the formation of implicit memories. When a person experiences a traumatic event, the amygdala goes into overdrive. I mean, it fires off this rapid response system to either engage in fight or flight behaviors, freeze states, to deal with the stress of the traumatic event. It's also constantly marking emotionally significant events and tagging them and encoding them into implicit memories. But it's encoded, like I was mentioning earlier, as sensory information. So it's body sensations, emotions, things that are like from our 5 senses that are associated with that event. So they don't come with the explicit components typically. Like an understanding, a rational thought, or facts, or images of the event. They come as all this sensory experience, and that's what makes you feel so distorted, or what is going on. This is so out of character or excessive, for what I'm experiencing right now. So traumatic events can really overactivate the amygdala, and as I was mentioning, any significant emotional event is going to mark and tag and put into implicit memory. So now you have this massively emotionally significant event, which it stores in the body as all that sensory information, and then this can go on to affect people months, years, and decades later. So in therapy, what we're doing, and I've had another video if you want to watch on the 5 trauma therapies I wish I knew first. You can watch that video to get an explanation of those things. But in all those therapies, what we're doing is we're working with implicit memory networks. And then because the amygdala out there in the street, outside my office, can hijack people and get so overreactive, and it's also tracking the environment for any threat cue related to that trauma. And I've mentioned in other videos compound association. So what happens as well is there's the traumatic event. So let's say I go somewhere and there's some association that day that triggers that trauma for me. So it comes as maybe a panic attack or dissociation. And now the way the subcortical brain works associatively, where I was, let's say Starbucks or Taco Bell or anywhere else, now can become an association. So then you go over time where you haven't gotten the help or the healing that you need, years or decades. I've got so many associations. So my amygdala is just constantly in this fear state or numb state that it's producing, like, they're just tracking everything. So I'm just afraid of everything. Is how it just kind of metastasizes. So in therapy, what we're doing is controlling the activation of the amygdala through, you know, my attachment to the client, slowing things down, helping work with their body sensations, getting connected and activated to these implicit memory networks, then releasing and discharging that energy out of your body. So then once and for all, you're free from the trauma can't affect you anymore. We know so much more than any point in human history of how to do this now. So you don't have to live with these things no matter how long you've lived with them. It's really key to work with the body, and that's why I've had other things I've written prior about how talk therapy can't heal trauma, because we've got to get deeper in the brain, and it often becomes the block to healing your trauma. And many of you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. You've gone to therapy for years, in and out. You found kind, supportive people who listened to you and encouraged you, but I still kept having all these trauma symptoms, because you've got to get deeper in the brain and create these changes and this discharge of that energy. So that's, again, something that I want every one of my clients, my goals when they walk into my office is to educate them, like I'm doing with you in the video, to undo aloneness, that you're not crazy. I understand completely how you have these symptoms. Let me explain to you why you have these symptoms, how that you're going to heal from these symptoms, and how science has showed us the laws of the brain and the body and how they have to follow these laws. And they don't have a choice, just like gravity. It's a little more complicated sometimes than gravity, but it can be done by every single person. There's nobody that doesn't have the capacity to heal. And I know that may be hard for some of you to believe, just like it is for some of my clients. And, you know, after they do, they will tell me things like, man, those first couple of sessions, I didn't believe it at all, but I knew you believed it, so I held on to your belief until I could get my own belief. So that's the reason, again, my wife and I put up these videos all the time, is we want to educate you, encourage you, undo aloneness, and give you hope of how to find a healing path that you can heal from. Take as many resources as you can, as much help as you can. You know, I'm always trying to learn and open to new approaches. I have no loyalty to anything but truth. So I just want to always keep getting better at helping you and the rest of my clients. So if you found this video helpful, please pass it on to anybody who could benefit from it. If you'd like to contact us and find out more information about some of these topics, or we sit down with you, anything, you can reach us at HawkinsCounselingCenter.com. You can ask for either me, John, or my wife, Basan. We'll be more than happy to spend time with you or give you more resources so you could finally heal from what you've been through.